see. Few insights, people. Not sure if... Let's see if that can hold. Got... I take it that should be working to some extent, inshallah. Alright, so I can see some people are tuning in. It must be working. Right, inna alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulih al-Mustafa wa ala ibadi alladhina irtada wa man bihudahum ihtada wa bi athari ahli al-Madinah iqtafa wa ba'd. Salamu Allahi alaykum, people. Ahlan wa sahlan. Right, so just want to share a few insights. I'll just let 1-2 other people kind of tune in. Those of you that are, sorry, it's on this, I'm not using my iPad here and I've got it on this table, so sometimes it might shake a little. Okay, so shukran, ahlan wa sahlan. Alright, Muhammad Aqib Khan all the way from Kashmir. Wa alaikum assalam. Tasharrafna. Right, people, I wanted to take a few moments today, just share some insights which I do believe are incredibly important. It's to do with, I've been asked sometimes about many different topics and questions to do with the Quran. And sometimes these things can be summed up into methodological responses. Okay, so a lot of them fall under the same kind of response. If you just understand the key methodological difference, the answers to the other questions would make sense to you anyhow. So, I'm not in my Mufti cave, right? So this is post-iftar sessions, so they're not in the regular Mufti cave. Right, so that's with all my library and everything. But I want to take a look at how to read the Quran, okay? Now, when we read the Quran, and I don't mean by that a tajweed perspective on how to actually read as in recite the Quran. I'm speaking more from a perspective of understanding. How do we read the Quran? Now, there's different approaches to how this can be done. One approach that I'll be taking a look at and contrasting it with another, and that is a kind of dogmatist approach compared to a relativist approach. So these two avenues, if you like, that can be taken to understanding the Quran. One way is that this Quran, Allah has sent this and He is explaining everything there is ever to be really known. Anything else in life will always, so something not mentioned in here, we can learn about it, but it's not really that significant. Everything is just, the Quran will teach us about science, it will teach us about technology, it will teach us about medicine, it will teach us about taxonomy, it will teach us about economics, it will teach us about everything you can imagine. That's a perspective, that some people have that perspective. They think that the Quran has come, and they use certain verses like Allah will say tibyanan li kulli shay, that it's come as a clarification for everything, and they will understand this to mean this is a clarification of everything really ever. That's one way to look at this, and I'm gonna kind of come back to that. The other way is that the Quran came as a connection between the creator and creation. It was a rope, a lifeline. And Allah says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ. Hold on. And this connection was to reach mankind indefinitely, right throughout the time. But in order to do so, it had to focus on the society it was revealed in. They were the primary target. Therefore, they were a make or break deal. So the first effective community of Islam it all depended on them. So the Quran, the style, the language, naturally the language, but the language, the style, even the imagery, the key concepts, not all concepts, but several had to tie in significantly with the lives of the people, the first recipients of the Quran. So that's two very different ways on how to look at the Quran. And this makes a huge difference on the outcome when you're reading the Quran. So I want to go into this as an example. So I want to take a look at a verse of the Quran that I was actually pondering over today. And this is why I thought, well, maybe it'll be worth sharing some insights on this. And it's a verse from Surah At-Tawbah where Allah is explaining the months in the year. But before we go to that, in order to highlight these two different ways that I've said, how we look at the Quran, one being a dogmatist approach, that everything, we take it as dogma, we do not question, we do not try to necessarily, we can understand the actual wording, but we don't try to understand beyond that. We take this as this is how it was always meant to be. It's not about this came for the people it came for, it came forever like that. So let's take an example to clarify this. Let's go to Surah Dhariyat. Okay. So in Surah Dhariyat, which begins, that Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa Dhariyati Dharwan. So in this surah, Allah goes on to say, when He's explaining creation, وَالْأَرْضَ فَرَشْنَاهَا فَنِعْمَ الْمَاهِدُونَ, that Allah laid out the earth and so on. And I've discussed this previously when people have asked me about the flat earth perspective, and no, it's got nothing to do with that. But then Allah goes on to say, وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ, and from everything we created two genders. Okay, zawjain, partners. From every single thing, from every species, there was two sexes, two binary gender. وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ, from everything, خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, in the hope that you may come to think about this or reflect, or that it may be a reminder for you. And then Allah goes on to say that turn back to Allah, فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Now what's interesting is the dogmatist approach here would say, well, okay, Allah has taught us a law and everything must forever fit in that. If we find anything in the real world that goes against that, we just ignore this because that is how it always must be. A relativist approach would be to look at that and say, well, no, Allah was addressing primarily the first recipients of the Quran in a general way in how they understood the Quran, how they understood the world. And things generally do come in binary gender. So now when we've discovered, let's say there is the Mexico whiptail lizard as an example, which has a single gender. It doesn't have, it's a single gender species. And there are other species as well that are single gender. Now, when you come across that, does that mean, oh my God, the Quran is wrong? Does that mean there's a mistake in the Quran? Because Allah says, وَمِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ خَلَقْنَا زَوْجَيْنِ. We created from everything, كُلِّ شَيْءٍ زَوْجَيْنِ. But how can there be a single gender species then? Well, the answer to that the answer to that is that when Allah is addressing the people, He's addressing them relative to them and their immediate surroundings and world. He's not addressing everything in its entirety. Because if you do take that as a dogmatic approach, you will then struggle in saying, well, this doesn't add up with the real world then. Because there are certain species in the real world that are single gendered. They are not binary gendered as in male and female. So that's an approach I wanted to highlight. People, I say unfortunately, but there are Muslims who push sometimes this very dogmatist approach. I think there's another philosophy in why they push that, and that's usually because a very sectarian mentality carries a dogmatist approach because it serves obedience to the actual sect. So usually any kind of denominational sectarian groups do not like critical thinking, because critical thinking will make you question the group, and which by its nature undermines the authority of the group. So usually a dogmatist approach has no room for critical thinking. Okay. Now coming to this verse that I wanted to speak about in Surah At-Tawbah. Right, now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here, Inna iddat ash-shuhur, this is verse 36, Inna iddat ash-shuhur 'inda Allah, 12 shahran fi kitabillahi yawma khalaqa as-samawati wal ard, minha arba'atun hurum, dhalika ad-din al-qayyim, fala tadhlimu fihinna anfusakum. Right, so up to there. Now, this verse, Allah is saying that the number of months according to Allah are 12. Fi kitabillah. Now what does this mean? In the book of Allah, or some people have said in the knowledge of Allah, some people have said fi taqweemillah, in the sunan of Allah that He has laid up. Yawma khalaqa as-samawati wal ard, the day He created the heavens and the earth. Minha arba'atun hurum, of them are 4 holy or sacred months. ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمِ, that is the precise deen. فَلَا تَظْلِمُوا فِيهِنَّ أَنفُسَكُمْ, do not oppress yourselves or others amongst you in these months. Now, what does this mean? Why do I want to focus on this verse? Because this verse caught my attention. Why it caught my attention? One, obviously, the aspect of the holy months, which I'll come to. By the way, Ramadan is not one of those holy months. But I'll come to that in a moment. Two, this thing of, does that mean 12 months in a year is a sacred is this a divine decree and measurement of time? And that is important to understand, because the lens you now put on will entirely change the result for you. So there's one way, like if we put on now the dogmatist lens and read that, we would understand, they would read that like this. And this is why I want to show diverse ways of reading the Quran. They would understand that as Inna iddata ash-shuhuri 'inda Allah, that Allah is telling us, indeed, the months as they've been laid out are only 12. That is according to the decree of God from when He created the heavens and the earth. And of them are 4 sacred months. So these 4 sacred months have existed since time immemorial. And from the beginning of time, they've been 4 holy months. And these 4 holy months are, they begin with Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, Muharram, and then Rajab. Okay, so that's a dogmatist way of looking at this. The other way is, so have all cultures always had 12 months in a year? And this is what kind of got me thinking when I was thinking about this, the other day, and I thought I'll share this because it's not actually true. Many cultures had actually had varying calendars, many of them 13 months in a year. So amongst them, even till today, the Coptic kind of calendar has 13 months in a year. Historically, many civilizations, the Mayan civilization, the kind of Inca, the ancient, so the South American ancient kind of civilizations, ancient China, parts of ancient India, other civilizations had actually 13 months in a year. Even recently, in the beginning of the last century and from the 19th century, there was a movement to kind of turn the calendar, the common calendar that we have, which is 12 months, there was a movement to turn that into a 13-month calendar consisting of 28 days. One of the key proponents to this was those of you that have heard of Kodak, the camera. Well, one of the I believe he was the founder of that. I think his name was Eastman. I think George Eastman. He was actually one of the key proponents of this movement called the International Fixed Calendar. And it would have 13 months and each month would have 28 days. And that would be spot on. Each day would begin with Sunday. And it would be the same every year. So there would be 13 months. They would all have 28 days. Now there would be one extra day which they proposed to call null day. It doesn't actually count in any week or any day or any month. This kind of proposition they had, which they called an international fixed calendar, they actually ran it. Kodak ran this with many factories and businesses throughout the world. And I believe for several decades throughout the last century, up until maybe the late 70s or early 80s, they actually tried to head that campaign. It eventually kind of died down. But what's interesting is that approach, they said it was more effective for business and things like this because the dates and the days were always set. But the question was that against God's law? This becomes the interesting question. That by doing so, do we suddenly become anti-God? That's the question that I'm trying to get at. And from a dogmatist perspective, if you read the Quran in a dogmatist approach, you would say, yes, that is, not only is that anti-Gregorian calendar, but that's actually anti-God. Because although the Gregorian calendar is based on the solar cycle, but it is still 12 months in a year, and to set 13 months, as these people had done, would be to go against God. If you read that in a relativist approach, you would understand, well, actually, no. What Allah was saying here is He was addressing the Arabs with an understanding they already had. So the Arabs already, and most of the world, used to set their calendar through the moon. And in another verse of the Quran, you find Allah mentions that He says in Surah Yunus in verse 5, هو الذي جعل الشمس ضياء والقمر نورا, that Allah made the sun a source of light and the moon a kind of light. وَقَدَّرَهُ مَنَازِلَ, and He set out for the moon certain set stations. Set manazil is how it lands or how it appears to land. لِتَعْلَمُوا, so that you may know, not Allah, so that you may know عدد السنين, the number of years, وَالْحِسَابِ, and keeping account, records. Right now, so Allah is saying, and then He goes on that these are signs of Allah. يُفَصِّلُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمِ يَعْلَمُونَ. He explains His signs for people that may have knowledge. Now, Allah set this out because all civilizations, or all people, no matter how primitive they were, they all had access to the moon. They didn't have to be huge astronomers. They didn't have to. The moon was something that people could set as an easy calendar for them. But many civilizations, like I said, in South America, ancient China, ancient India, different parts of the world, had 13 moons in a year, not 12. Tabari highlights that certain Arab tribes were trying to have 13. So for a people to prosper, they need to have certain accounts. They need to set out calendars, set out records in order to prosper. Now for them, Allah had laid out that, look, it is 12. That those who are trying to disrupt this at the time are doing this to no avail, but they're just disrupting the other people who are trying to get ahead. Now, the interesting thing here is that the Arabs from the time of Ismail alayhi salam believed in these 4 sacred months in a year. They were 3 which follow each other. So beginning with Dhul Qa'dah, Dhul Hijjah, so these 2, and the months of Hajj, Muharram which comes after, and then Rajab which is on its own later on, which comes before Sha'ban. So this was from the time of, some say, Ibrahim or Ismail alayhi salam. The reason they had this was so they can do Hajj, so they can get ready Dhul Qa'dah, they sit down, stop fighting, they head to the Hajj, and Muharram so they can come back from the Hajj safely. So this was done in a way that it would allow people to do Hajj and Rajab, so people could do that they could do Umrah on their own in safety and come back. And there was some difference of opinion with certain Arabs. People like, I believe it was Rabi'a, they would call Ramadan Rajab, and some tribes like Quda'a would say there's no holy months, and they would just do their own thing. And I believe there were some other tribes like they and 1-2 others that rejected the sanctity. But the thing is, the situation of the Arabs required, for them to prosper, it required some kind of, if I can say, universal agreement on measurement. And 2, it required them to have some sanctity so they could prosper, so they could put aside bloodshed and fighting. Now you would think, well, what's so important about not fighting in these 4 months? Why not just say there shouldn't be any fighting at all? Because in essence, there should be no fighting. But the Arabs at the time were in such a state that if the focus was just universal, it wasn't going to happen. They would not embrace it. The only way they could embrace it was in this partial message. They could embrace this. So there were many Arabs that would say, okay, we won't fight in these 4 months, and that much we'll embrace. So for them, this is laid out in a way that is digestible. And some of the madhabs kind of, I believe, I don't agree with their understanding, like the Shafi'i madhab that went on to say that these 4 months are so holy that if anybody, even out of the Arabs' time, that if somebody commits a crime in them, they have to be extra penalized. To me, that's a misunderstanding of the Sharia. So this whole point is that it's for the Arabs to be able to kind of prosper. So they would say somebody would hate that person so much, he would want to kill him, but because it's a holy month, he would let it be. So Allah was not trying to say that this is for the whole of mankind. Since we created the world, there were these 4 holy months. Because if you lived in South America, let's say back then, what difference would it make to you about these holy months? Like you wouldn't even be, apart from you wouldn't even have 12 months in a year, you would have 13 months, most likely, as the South Americans did until the kind of until the kind of Christopher Columbus, and then followed by the whole colonial kind of powers came over. So what difference would it make to you if you were in ancient China about Dhul Hijjah, about the month of Hajj? It wasn't. So if this was for time immemorial, this was since pre-eternal time that these 4 months were holy, it wouldn't make any sense. Like if there was no Hajj, and we know all the different prophets had a different Sharia to them. So let's say, people from in Nuh alayhi salam's time, there was no Hajj that people were doing. So what would be the purpose of having Dhul Hijjah as a holy month? And they would have had their own months. So what does that mean now, this verse that we were reading in Surah At-Tawbah is meaningless? That the months of the year are 12 according to Allah. Fi kitabillah, in the law, kitabiyah means like the laws as He's laid out relative to you. The day He created the heavens and the earth, He knew that you would arrive at this situation. He knew that. And from amongst them, for you to prosper, it was important that 4 were set aside as holy months, in order to kind of allow you to kind of shed these feuds, these kind of blood feuds that you've got gradually. Okay. So that, and this, ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمِ, people like Al-Hafidh Al-Baghawi said that that actually meant that is the measurement, the kind of natural measurement, not deen of Islam. So does that mean this verse now it's just circumstantial, or does it actually mean much? Well, actually it means a lot, because it shows that the Quran, Allah is addressing people about nature that is relevant to them. He's highlighting that the systems being put in place result in progress. He's highlighting certain compromises that they have to make amongst themselves and cooperations. He's highlighting that Allah in His knowledge knows these things from humanity. And Allah is highlighting that humans working towards this is part of Allah's plan and divine decree. So I just wanted to share some of these and the diverse approaches. So you've got this particular verse as an example, when Allah is speaking about 12 months in a year. Is that a holy decree? Is that how God always wants calendars to be? And the example I was looking at was, let's say you had the International Fixed Calendar, which worked on a 13-month of 28 days each, with a set week, with set days for all time, with one extra day in a year called a null day, which didn't fit anyway. Would that be anti-God? And that was the example. And I was saying, well, if you came from a dogmatist approach where anything that's mentioned in the Quran, Allah is never mentioning it relatively. He's always mentioning it universally. Everybody has to. So this, when Allah said about these 4 holy months, the 4 holy months applied even to the Mayan kind of dynasty civilization, and the whole Inca and the South American and the ancient Chinese and the ancient Indians, and applied to everybody even though they don't know about this. Or you could take a relativist approach and you'd say, well, no, these months are not necessarily per se that they have to be 12. It's just that this is what most humans would kind of go with, and it worked. And Allah was addressing the Arabs of the time, because for them, some people were causing disruption and a system was needed. So I hope that's, inshallah, of some help. I just wanted to highlight different perspectives really in looking at the Quran, how these perspectives sometimes are fueled by certain other background kind of maybe dynamics, like depending on a group or a sect you belong to or your way of thinking, and how that results in a different understanding of the Quran. Right, people, that's it. If there's any few questions, I can maybe take 1 or 2, but then we can maybe wrap this up. Just want to share some of those insights. That was pretty much it, people. Alright, shukran, Khalil Muhammad Naf. Alright, okay. Enough it is. Shukran wa ahlan wa sahlan. Sajida, loving these Ramadan bites. Shukran. Barakallahu feek. Cool. Any other interesting... if there's any one or two questions, I can take them. And then wrap this up. Those who attribute teeth to Allah. That's absurd. Amir Liaqat. He's always full of drama. There's a conversation about abortion laws going on. Your views. Whoa, that's a completely different topic right there. I mean, you see, my understanding on things like abortion are that parents have a choice. I do recognize that some people are much more, I think actually in the UK, I could be wrong, but my understanding is in the UK, people are pretty chilled about these kind of things. I think this is more an American kind of heated discussion. In the UK, I think pretty much everybody, I don't know, the general feel is this isn't really a big deal. People understand it's not that they don't recognize that the fetus isn't alive. They recognize that it's alive. But life is like a continuum. So it's not the same as a human that is born. So many things, so life is obviously developing on this continuum. Because in that sense, even plants are alive. Animals are alive. There's many, and obviously this is a fetus on its way to becoming a human being. But before it's become, abortion, is it a right that the parents have based on certain, whatever their understanding of their circumstances? I would go with the understanding that they do have this right. And I'm sure people would disagree with that, and I accept that. There's no, I don't think everybody has to agree with what I say or how I see things. Any recommendations on what type of khajur, what type of dates to eat? God damn, good to see that. Good to see that people have got their priorities in focus. Alright, so here it's a political, because our baby orange. Oh, because in America it's crazy. I think it's a make or break deal for, I think, presidential candidates. Obviously, I mean, well, alright, any other one, two? Otherwise, let's call this a wrap, people. It's 10th Muharram when you get a chance. Sure, later on, it's not Muharram right now. I don't think we need to stress too much about Muharram right now. But as it comes, we can definitely take a look at that. Cool, people. I think we'll leave it to that. Any issues, inshallah, give me a shout, reach out. Right, I have no idea about sports. Somebody asked about sports. I don't really watch many sports, so no idea. I had to actually catch up about this whole Mo Salah thing, because at first I had no idea what was going on. Two approaches can be fused into one approach, even closer to the truth. I don't know if the two lenses can simultaneously be one. I don't know if you can simultaneously be dogmatic and like looking at things critically and relatively. I don't know if you can. But yes, of course, there can be certain things, unquestionably, not everything in the Quran has to be relatively spoken of, because some things are just very clear. But I was speaking about certain things where Allah is addressing you about you or the world or nature. These things, do they have to be taken as is Allah addressing you with prior knowledge, or is He addressing you as though you have no knowledge and this is where knowledge now begins? That's the kind of question. So If Allah mentions something about creatures, does that mean we dismiss all? Does Allah expect us to now build our knowledge of creatures starting from that point on? Or is this supposed to go into your existing knowledge? That's the question. Right. Did the fire literally cool for Ibrahim alayhi salam? That's once again goes into, nowhere in the Quran does it actually mention that Ibrahim alayhi salam was thrown into the fire. It doesn't mention that in any of the verses. It mentions that he was saved from it. Just as Noah was saved from the flood. He wasn't actually, drowned or casted into the water and then saved. It wasn't like that. So, cool. Right, people, inshallah. Some strange questions coming on. I've got no idea here what on earth is going on about Ibrahim alayhi salam and the Shia. The Shia and Ibrahim. No idea what you're on about. Obviously, the fasts are getting to you. Alright, people, let's call it a wrap, inshallah. Take very good care of yourselves. Stay awesome, stay blessed, stay in touch. This should be up on my YouTube. By the way, and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you can keep in touch with the latest clips, people, and the latest fatwa. Alright, take very good care of yourselves. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.